Welcome to the Key of Imagination. This week we're going to be looking at the Twilight Zone episode, The After Hours. We'll talk about what it is that draws Marsha and the rest of the mannequins back to the store. We'll dive into what it means to be conscious and even answer the question, is Marsha a conscious being? And I'll reveal my moment of awe, which deals with the episode's direction, cinematography, and sound mixing. So, grab your keys and let's open up this door to the fifth dimension. You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Marsha White is taking a routine trip to the department store to buy her mother a golden thimble. A lovely gesture. As she waits patiently for the elevator with the rest of the patrons, the service elevator next to it opens up, and she's given a personal lift to the 9th floor. However, when she arrives at the floor, it's empty. And before she can even get back into the elevator to go down, the operator closes the door and leaves. After a brief walk through the darkness, a saleswoman greets Marsha and offers to help her find what she's looking for. And wouldn't you know it? There just happens to be a single item for sale on the 9th floor. A golden thimble. After a somewhat awkward and intense exchange with the saleswoman, Marsha gets back on the elevator and makes her way down, only to realize that the thimble is scratched and dented. This will simply not do for Mother. She tries to return it to the store, but they won't honor her purchase. Why? Well, first, she has no receipt. Second, there is no 9th floor. Marsha passes out, and with all of the rushing to close the store on time, the manager forgets about her in his office. Now, Marsha is all alone in the store, with nothing but the silence and the eerie gazes of the mannequins seemingly coming closer and closer to her. And in fact, they are. These mannequins are alive. Marsha, surrounded and hysterical, finally starts to recognize a familiar voice. The saleswoman. It turns out that Marsha is late for a very important date. She was supposed to be back to the store yesterday, and now the saleswoman is going to lose practically a whole day of her life on the outside world. As the saleswoman waves goodbye and leaves, Marsha takes her rightful place as another mannequin in the store. The After Hours is directed by our old friend Douglas Hayes. The teleplay is by Rod Serling. And as for our cast, we've got a few people to mention here. Let's start with the lovely Anne Francis as Marsha White. Elizabeth Allen plays the saleswoman, John Conwell is our elevator operator, and James Milholland is our store manager. The episode first aired on June 10th, 1960. As for our tidbits, you know I love a good positive comment. In Grams Jr.'s Unlocking the Door, actress Anne Francis had the following to say about Rod Serling. He was a wonderful man, a brilliant man, with a sense of humor. That was back in the days when we rehearsed the show for a full week before we shot it, so we knew every shot that was going to be done. It was wonderful to be able to do that. You know, I think that's something that can get lost a little bit in our conversation of Rod Serling. He was apparently quite funny. His daughter, Anne, emphasizes this in her book, As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling, which again, if you have never read before or haven't simply had the chance, it's a great book for learning more about the man. I think the extensive rehearsing shows in the episode, particularly regarding the blocking of the actors and the cinematography, something I'll talk more about in my moment of awe. As for my initial thoughts, like most, I loved the episode. I actually think this is one of those episodes that is, in some ways, just as good, and maybe even a little bit better, the second and third time around as it is on the first watch, provided you view it with different eyes. On a first watch, you passively let the story unfold, and it's a fantastic experience, don't get me wrong. But I had just as much fun watching Marsha's mannerisms to look for clues and for places where she might know that there's something not quite human going on, or that there's something at least odd about the department store itself. That was a lot of fun to just watch for those clues. So yeah, my initial thoughts on this rewatch were incredibly positive. Question 1. What is it that draws the mannequins back to the department store? The plot is quite an intriguing one if you really think about it. The idea that mannequins go out into the world, live among us, and then come back to the store after a month for another mannequin to do the same. But that led me to think about the actual premise of the episode, which is that Marsha is late, and it's someone else's turn. So, what happens when a mannequin doesn't come back? What happens if they just want to stay living among us? That's where this question for me comes into play. Now, I'm going to take this one a little fancy-free, but there are reasons for that. So, let's just start to make our way through it. We're given a kind of surface-level answer for why Marsha is here when she first speaks with the elevator operator. She tells him that she's here for gold thimbles and that they had them advertised. We'll actually come back to that last part about advertising a little bit later. Once Marsha gets to the 9th floor, she then tells the saleswoman more specifically that she's looking for a gold thimble for her mother. It's this last part that I want to focus on a bit. Serling could have written this as simply Marsha is looking for a thimble for herself, but he didn't. Why have her search for a gift for a mother that doesn't exist? Let's get a little psychological here. Now, we've mentioned the psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung before, most recently in episode 26, The Execution. We'll bring him in here again to help us set the stage for our ultimate argument. One of, if not the primary idea that Jung is known for, is the belief that we have certain archetypes that we inherit as part of our human existence. But in some ways, these are better thought of as like cookie cutters, forms of major figures that then get filled in with our personal experiences and interactions with other traits within these forms. One of the more important archetypes is the mother figure and the concept of mother love, which Jung describes as one of the most moving and unforgettable memories of our lives, the mysterious root of all growth and change, the love that means homecoming, shelter, and the long silence from which everything begins and in which everything ends. Now, it's important to understand again that these archetypes are merely forms, and they're filled with personal experiences, both negative and positive. But I simply want to point out for now how important this relationship to the mother archetype is for Jung. A positive relationship with the mother archetype tends to lead to a better sense of self and positive individuation, or the building of identity. So, what does this have to do with Marsha? Well, think about it. She's buying a gift for her mother, a positive act, which at the very least means that she believes that there's some reason for her mother to deserve such a gift. Additionally, she seems quite happy to be on this quest for a gift, and she's willing to defend the right for her mother to receive a gift that is worthy of her, which is why she's so upset about the scratched up and dented thimble. All of this indicates that in Marsha's eyes, she has a good relationship with her mother, which means she also likely feels a strong sense of individuation, a sense of her identity. Do you realize what this means? It means that these mannequins, which, when they stay out too long, can start to build identity, albeit one that is based on their belief that they're alive in the human sense. Now, is this an error or a part of the mechanism? I think it's the latter. I think this idea that the mannequins build a sense of identity is part of the puzzle that brings them back. Now, when the mannequin saleswoman is selling Marsha the gold thimble, she says it's 14-karat gold and quite distinctive looking, I think. She then adds, "Don't you?" As in, don't you also think it looks distinctive? Okay, all right, bear with me. I'm going to be busting out my English degree here for a second and really focusing on this term. This word distinctive is a fascinating choice. She could have used something like beautiful, charming, elegant. But distinctive is interesting because it's trying to play into the concept of uniqueness. Now, thimbles, even gold thimbles, are not exactly unique. However, they have quite a bit of artistic flair that differentiate them and make them unique, based upon decorations materials, and even the stones that are embedded within them sometimes. In short, they even have a kind of identity. Now, here's my crazy idea. I think there's something possibly implanted within her, maybe even within all of them. A kind of trigger item, something that makes them yearn to purchase this specific item in the store. I also think that either the thimble works for all of them, or at least it's an item that has been used before to get Marsha back in line. Why do I say this? Remember, there's a second scene with the elevator operator where Marsha starts to complain about the thimble being scratched. Now, had she simply said that it had a scratch on it, fine, no big deal, sometimes items get scratched. But listen to her full description of it. She says, "It's scratched and it's dented. It looks as if somebody has stepped on it or something." This is quite different from just a mere scratch. This thing is well worn. It's been used before. And note also in the second elevator scene that the operator refuses to look at it when Marsha pleads with him to do so. He doesn't care because he's probably seen it before. He knows what it looks like. He just wants Marsha to hurry up and get to the point where she realizes that she's one of them. So what is it that brings the mannequins back to the store? I think it's a combination of the building of a sense of identity, of uniqueness, with an implanted trigger memory that's connected to either the thimble for Marsha or an item in some way, to a physical object that's often advertised. And when they see it, it makes them want to go to the store and buy one. That's what I think brings them back to the store when they go rogue. And if I'm right, I think it's an absolutely brilliant concept. Question 2. How does this episode showcase the complex relationship we have with consciousness? We have an interesting kind of parallel here with the first episode of the series, Where Is Everybody? In that inaugural episode, you have a man who suddenly finds himself on a road, alive and simply existing. Ironically, you also have the great scene where he's talking with, that's right, a mannequin. But that's just a happy coincidence here, I think. What is of importance is that you have this moment of sudden realization that I exist. In the corresponding KOI episode for Where Is Everybody, we talked about the philosopher Heidegger's notion of thrownness, as in we are thrown into existence. In short, we're born, we have no say to whom we're born, or where we're born, or with what genes or anything. We're simply thrown into existence. This episode is actually fascinating because Marsha represents a kind of aftermath of thrownness, and there are some really interesting questions that we need to address in order to better understand what happens when one is not simply thrown into existence, but thrown in with a kind of reservoir of adult knowledge and social norms. So let's get into it. We know that Marsha wasn't actually born. She was created. Or perhaps an even colder word might be crafted or built. Sounds harsh, I know, but we need to be a bit precise here for a purpose. In some ways, it's not that different from being born because in both cases you have a kind of origin point. The biggest difference, however, lies in the pathway to adulthood. A child who is born will mature, meaning a kind of accumulation of numerous experiences that will shape how he or she will perform adulthood. But Marsha has not matured, and yet she somehow has accumulated the following experiences. She learned how to dress and how to style herself, learned how to talk to people, learned that buying a gift is a way of showing appreciation and affection. And as we talked about in the first question, she learned about the role that a mother plays. In short, she somehow has experiences of maturation. Does that mean she is a conscious being? Well, it depends on who you ask. The term conscious or consciousness has become quite a fiery term as of late, as we attempt to figure out what it means to be conscious. Let's define it through our old friends at Stanford University and their fantastic philosophy database. Something is conscious just in case there is something that it's like to be it. Thanks, Stanford. That clears that up. Good night, Mrs. Calabash. After having read that, I questioned my own state of consciousness. Okay, wait, there is a clarification bit that's added. That is to say, if it has some kind of experience, no matter how basic. Okay, that actually does help, Stanford. So, consciousness is tied to experience. If anything has experience, it is conscious? Well, maybe. A plant tries to grow toward the sun because it's experiencing some kind of distress. Does that mean it is conscious? Well, according to people who believe in pan-experientialism, the answer is yes. Let's go to Stanford once more to get our best understanding of pan-experientialism. Humans have incredibly rich and complex experience. Horses less so, mice less so again. Standardly, the pan-experientialist holds that this diminishing of the complexity of experience continues down through plants and through to the basic constituents of reality, perhaps electrons and quarks. If the notion of having experience is flexible enough, then the view that an electron has experience, of some extremely basic kind, would seem to be coherent. Now, I don't want to misrepresent Stanford here. They include the fact that there is still plenty of debate surrounding this. Nonetheless, the logic itself holds pretty true, pretty good if you accept the initial premise about experience equating with consciousness. You know where I'm going with this? In a pan-experientialist world, Marsha is absolutely a conscious being. She has experiences, like what we mentioned, and she even goes so far as to create experiences for others and interact with an entire world of experiences. What I find particularly interesting here is Marsha's final scene. If you watch the scene where she's standing with the Captain Mannequin, yes, that's a new superhero I just invented, Captain Mannequin. He just kind of stares at you awkwardly until you really feel like you should probably leave. When Marsha is standing there as the captain starts to approach her, she's somewhat unconsciously already starting to stiffen up her body and stand more like a mannequin. Her innate experiences are what make this a fairly unconscious move, and yet they are in alignment with how she perceives she should experience the world. Then, she begins to use her conscious perception of self to get the final pose just right. She's using her agency to establish the experiences that she wants in both the present and the future. So, you have this fantastic moment where the unconscious or subconscious experience begins to alter her perception of self within the world of the department store, and then the conscious acceptance of what her current state of experience should entail kicks in. Does that make sense, or did I just go all Stanford? Now, I'm not a pan-experientialist, but I see the logic, and this episode is quite a fascinating look at how experience, both subconsciously or unconsciously, although those words are a bit flunky, I admit, and her conscious experiences help us to better understand what it means for something to be a conscious being. In the world of pan-experientialism, Marsha is conscious. Now, in my personal point of view, I'm not so sure I'm ready to give her that label just yet. I actually think I would have to think a lot more about it. But I'm also not completely dismissing the possibility. Question 3. What are your moments of awe? As for my moment of awe, I want to give a shout out to Director of Photography George T. Clemens for this episode. As I did my rewatch in my basement with the lights off, I suddenly found myself absolutely marveling at some of the shots that Clemens was able to get, particularly when Marsha is walking down the aisle at the 1302 mark. The eerie quiet, with the exception of her shoes, the disturbed look on her face, and the slow, methodical pacing. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's a fantastic reminder that there's an art form here, and that although the story itself is quite wonderfully composed by Serling, people like Clemens, director Douglas Hayes, and a name we have not mentioned in a while, composer Bernard Herrmann, envelop us in a kind of trance-like state and hold us in their world, only to release us when they're finished telling their story. In short, good cinematography, directing, and sound can absolutely place us in a state of awe. And I think that particularly shines through in this episode. As for my rating, I give this one a top middle tier. Now, why not a top tier? I think you could do a bit more with Marsha at the very end. One of the mannequins asks her if she enjoyed herself. Was it fun? To this, she simply replies, ever so much fun. I don't know. I was craving just something else there. One more thing, a reflection or some depth. Something. I get it. I'm nitpicking what is a great episode. But that's what you get if you're trying to get into my top tier. You've got to bring it all the way to the end. Still, this episode is pretty darn close to making it into that top tier. Next time, we'll be taking a look at The Mighty Casey, and here are your questions to consider when watching the episode. Question 1. Is this episode giving us a glimpse into the future of sports? Question 2. How does this episode showcase the differences between machine logic and human logic? And question 3. What are your moments of awe? I've got a couple of comments from the YouTube channel to highlight. On my A Passage for Trumpet episode, God is God 777 had the following to say. Dude, I was looking for a brand new episode last night. Absolutely superb analysis. Keep it up. First, as I said in my reply to you, I always appreciate the kind thoughts and motivation. But you know, it's funny because this connects with something I mentioned in my moment of awe for that very episode. It took God is God 777 all of, 15 seconds to leave that comment? But I carried that kindness with me the whole day. And this was my actual point. What can mean very little to you in terms of resources can mean a whole lot to someone else. Also in that same episode, friend of the show J-Rod provided a fascinating quotation from an interview between George Carlin and Jon Stewart. I'm actually going to repeat most of it, of what George Carlin said, even though it's a bit lengthy, because I think it's really important. Carlin states, where the drugs are concerned and alcohol, they do seem to open a window for you. They do seem to broaden the vistas at first. First time, mostly pleasure, very little pain, maybe a hangover. And as you increase and keep using whatever it is, the pleasure part decreases and the pain part, the price you pay, increases until the balance is completely the other way. And it's almost all pain, and there's hardly any pleasure. Now at that point, you would hope that the intellect says, oh, this doesn't work anymore. I'm going to die, and that I'll do something. But you need people around you who can help you, and you need something to live for. You have to have something to look forward to bring you out. You know, there are a lot of people who feel like they don't have a lot to live for, and they're sort of stuck inside. First and foremost, I always appreciate these great insights, these little pop cultural connections that we find, so keep them coming. And as I mentioned in my reply, this exchange kind of reminds me a little bit of that hero-superhero trope of the hero who feels like he has to take a magic elixir in order to become strong enough to defeat his enemies, only to realize that with each sip, he's actually destroying his own health. An example of this is in the show The Boys. Now, I won't say more in case people want to watch it, but for those of you who are familiar with the show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I wonder if there's some kind of a connection there between substance abuse and that particular motif. The last thing I'll say is this, and it's something that I say a lot, and I'm going to keep saying it a lot, because you never know when this is the time that someone needs to hear it. So listen up. If you're struggling with some kind of substance, now's the time to go get help. Turn all of this off and go get that help. Why? Because the world needs the best version of you that we can possibly get for as much time as we can have you. We need your help out there. You can continue our conversations by heading over to our Discord server and either starting a conversation about this episode or taking part in one that's already happening. The link to join the server should be in the episode notes section. You can also head over to thekeyofimagination.com, where you can rate this episode, learn more about me, watch previous episodes of the show, and check out my Curios page where I showcase some of the Twilight Zone trinkets I've bought over the years. I encourage people to email me thoughts and comments, whether it's about a particular Twilight Zone episode, your rating for an episode, or about the Key of Imagination show. You can get those to me as a text email, an audio clip, or even a video clip of roughly no more than 5 minutes to keyofimaginationsshow@gmail.com. Keep in mind, even though we talk about some serious topics, we're trying to maintain as family-friendly of an atmosphere as we can. If you would rather I not use your comments on the show, please indicate that so I can respect your decision. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you please take a moment and do one, if not all, of the following to help build our community. Rate the show, review the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all of the usual algorithmic gymnastics that will help get the show in front of more people and help us build our community of Twilight Zone fans. However, even if you do none of that, and you absolutely hated every minute of this, I would still like to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, all doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination.